So emotional and powerful, just a few of the dozens and dozens of folks that have found God at one of the Northway's 5 locations. In that first testimony that we opened up with there at our Wexford campus in the sanctuary, we were asked by a local business if they could use the room for a large regional training meeting. And we said yes, and Tatum walked in to that meeting, but she sensed God in the building. She was not aware, even at that point, that she was missing God, but obviously God was missing her. 2 years ago, a leadership team at Northway, we had really sensed that Dormont was to be the site of our 5th campus. And, we had many of our current staff people that we knew could lead that campus. We had stewarded your giving with so much discipline that we had set aside a launch fund. So we had the resources to launch the campus in Dormont, but we didn't have a place. And I had spent several afternoons, a morning or two, prayer walking around Dormont. And we were investigating a few of what I would call sort of long shot possibilities. But one rainy morning, I went over to Dormont, and just before I got out of my car to pray and walk around a bit, I'll be very transparent. I threw up that morning a bit of a desperation prayer. Because we had been looking for a while, and everything that we were the doors we were knocking at just kept getting closed. And just as I stepped out of that car, I saw a for sale sign. Must have just went up in the old Dormont Presbyterian church building. And I really felt like God was showing me that this is where Northway needed to be. Maybe because there was a beautiful young woman there named Autumn that needed to know that she was loved by the Most High God. There are stories like Autumn and Tatum's at all of our locations, people that did not know God, but God knew them, and He used Northway to embrace them. Folks, about 10 years ago, maybe if you're newer to Northway, we were faced with a bit of a challenging decision. Should we use some of the property at our Wexford location, launch a massive capital campaign, and build a larger sanctuary space there, or should we investigate something new that was sort of emerging across the country called multi-site churches? And I remember being in those meetings. I remember weighing the risk, and all of us in unity at that time saying, let's go multi-site, rather than remain solely in Wexford and invite people to come to us. Let's go to them. Oakland, what was first. We started in an old Chinese restaurant. You might not even have seen that yet. This is the brand new building in Oakland. Amidst, thousands of college students and graduate students, young professionals everywhere, and folks that have grown up all their life in the shadow of Pitt's Cathedral of Learning. It was sort of risky at that point, and there was certainly some desperate prayer moments, but scores of people have met God there. I love Northway Oakland. From there, a core team from the Wexford campus was formed that had a passion of launching a brand new church in Sewickley. In Northway, Sewickley Valley was launched, an incredible church in a wonderful suburb of Pittsburgh. Another launch team, primarily from our Oakland campus, was formed, and we landed in this historic Kelly Strayhorn Theater in the heart of East Liberty, Northway East End. And then, lastly, Northway Dormont came on board just a year or so ago. For the past 4 years, folks, my title at Northway has been lead pastor, and my key sort of roles here is to oversee our 5 campuses, to steward our resources with much discipline, and to transition, the church leadership from a 30-plus year founding Pastor Jay Passavant to me, and then eventually on to whoever will lead it from there. That's my role, and at times that role can be a bit daunting, I'll admit, and even heavy. My role changed 4 years ago, however, my passion has never changed, and that's to introduce people that do not know God to a God that desperately wants to know them. And I will always say this without any bit of shame, man, I will do anything to reach the Tatum and the Adams of this city. From the early church, of the New Testament all the way up till now. Folks, the local church is the only organization that I know of that exists and is established for the people that aren't part of it yet, right? Think about that for a moment. I'm so honored to be part of a church that chose to go to many neighborhoods and communities in Pittsburgh rather than remain in one and call Pittsburgh to that one spot. I've always loved the Message version of the Bible. It's description of Jesus that's found in John chapter 1, verse 16. It says, "The Word became flesh and blood, and it moved into the neighborhood." Our mission at Northway, if you've been around, you've probably heard this. It's simple: free people to follow Jesus. And our vision, so what does that mission look like? Our vision is one church, multiple locations, all generations. And in a time of prayer, a few years back, I sort of was asking God, give us a big vision. Give us a vision that, that if we pulled it off, we couldn't look around and say, well, we did that. Give us a vision that was large enough to be able to say, man, if that happens, then clearly, God, that one is on you. And again, if you've been around, you've heard us talk about this vision. Our vision is to reach 1% of the greater Pittsburgh population. That represents about 23,000 people for God's kingdom through a multi-site movement. And in this little two-part series called Multiply, I wanted to talk about Northway's mission and vision. I wanted to share with you why I think it's so important that we always remain passionate about reaching the Tatums and the Adams of this region. And I didn't want this series, though, to be about like Northway's growth strategy, or preach to you about your role in fulfilling Northway's vision. I wanted it to be about us. You know what I mean? I wanted it to be like, why do we do this? Why are we here today? And I heard that song Multiplied a few months back, and I asked the team to pull together maybe some testimonies, some real Northway people that are living and breathing testimonies of that vision statement. We have so many creative people here, and I knew they would make that happen. But, I was struggling with where to land for this sermon scripturally. Like what Bible text to preach out of. And a couple weeks ago, I thought I knew where I wanted to land. So just this past Tuesday, I sat down, I pulled my notes together, and I began to pray and to write. Typically by the end of the day Tuesday, I have a really solid outline of what I want to do, and I'll be honest, by the end of the day Tuesday, I had nothing. Tuesday night, I went home, and I got to say, I went to bed. I wasn't freaking out about this or anything, but before bed, I definitely threw up a bit of a desperation prayer. I was like, God, what do you want me to say this weekend? And at 3:50 a.m., I woke up with a Bible story on my mind. Seriously, this old, obscure, Old Testament story that I thought, anyhow, was from the book of Kings. I don't think I had ever preached it before. And as far as I could remember, I wasn't really even all that familiar with it. I knew it was 3:50 a.m. because I laid there for a minute or two, and then at 3:57 a.m., I grabbed my cell phone and texted myself the story so that I wouldn't forget it in the morning. And I must have woken Tina because, she said, who are you texting at 4 a.m. in the morning? And I said Jake from State Farm, but yeah, I wish I was that witty at 4. I didn't say that. I just sort of grunted something, and half an hour or so later, I couldn't sleep. So I got up, and I went downstairs, and I found that scripture. And by 6:30 a.m., I had sort of outlined what it is I want to share with you. So this text, it's found in 2 Kings chapter 7. We'll be there the whole time here, jumping in and out. And little background, the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel, Samaria, had been set siege by the Syrians, meaning that it had been surrounded. No food, no supplies were able to get inside. And the choice of the Israelites inside those walls were either come out and surrender and most likely be slaughtered or starve to death inside. And they were desperate. All hope was lost. The previous chapter actually records that the people were to the point of cannibalism. And then in verse 3, this is what it says. Now there were 4 men who were lepers at the entrance of the gate. And they said to one another, why are we sitting here until we die? Remember that question. If we say, let us enter the city, the famine is in the city, and we shall die there. And if we sit here, we die also. So now come, let us go over to the camp of the Syrians, and if they spare our lives, we shall live. And if they kill us, then we'll but die. So 4 Israelite men, because of their leprosy, they were not permitted inside the walls of Samaria. Therefore, they were starving to death alone between the walls, right, of a people that had rejected them and between the enemy that surrounded them. And they basically say, if we try and go into the city, they're going to kill us. If we stay here, we're going to die. So let's go over to the enemy's camp and surrender. I mean, I realize they're going to most likely chuck a spear at us and kill us, but what do we really have to lose here, right? Pretty much, every choice leads to death. But hey, let's head over to the Syrian camp, and at least we'll have an epic journey together. I really doubt that there are any desperate, lepers here living in the midst of a famine, participating at any of our 5 campuses today. However, folks, I hear subtle forms of desperation from you often in conversations. Things like, I hate my job. I hate what I become. I hate where I live. I hate my life. And when someone sits down with you and says, then why don't you make a change? You say, this is all I got. This is all I know. This is who I am. This is all I'll ever be. And I want to speak the question of a wise leper to you today. Why are you sitting there until you die? Folks, there are people here today that are desperate. I know you're desperate for life, but you're so afraid to live that you're going to spend your entire life just existing, accepting the status quo. You're blaming everyone in sight, or you point to bad breaks or bad karma. And maybe no one has had the guts to tell you that you need to stop living in a constant state of, I hate the way things are. And maybe nobody has even loved you enough to say, why are you sitting there until you die? Northway, I love you all, but maybe we need to all get a little more desperate. If you hate your job, get a new job. If you hate your marriage, get help. If you hate your choices, make new choices. If you hate where you live, then move. If you hate your life, change. But stop blaming it on your leprosy. The story of these 4 lepers reminded me that if I'm not content, and if you're not content with your current situations, maybe it's time for a risk. Maybe it's time for an epic journey. Like various communities in Pittsburgh, Homewood has seen better days. Unemployment, violence, gangs, this once thriving community is struggling in Homewood. There are incredible people there, wonderful, godly men and women, yet in the news, right, we just continually hear about shootings and drugs and the desperation of that community. You guys might not be aware of this, but one of Northway's visions, or one of its objectives, is to restore hope to Homewood. We have that written down. That's one of our key objectives. And mainly through the efforts of Brian McCabe, heroic efforts, might I say, and nearly 100 of our mentors in our LAMP ministry, we have been attempting to bring hope to Homewood through mentoring. Years ago, Brian and his wife, Julie, they literally put on flesh and moved into that neighborhood with their kids. Eugene and Dina Blackwell, who we know as Freedom and Free Blackwell, have also seen that desperation in the community that they love and where they lived, and they're not satisfied with the current state. And for many years, through their House of Manna ministry, they've sought to bring good news to the people of Homewood, folks that are on the edge of that community. And I have some exciting news for you today. Later this fall, Pastor Freedom, he will remain on our teaching team here at Northway. He's still going to provide us insight into diversity and urban reconciliation. He will sometime later in the fall begin to transition out of his role as the associate pastor to Brian McCabe at our East End campus. And this fall in Homewood, an abandoned building is going to be refurbished. Freedom will begin to gather a core team. A staff literally is being assembled. And God willing, target date of Easter, they will launch the House of Manna Church in a missional partnership with Northway. Now, folks, fire up for that. You know, this is going to be unique. I want you to hear this is not our 6th campus. It's a completely different autonomous church led by Pastor Freedom that Northway is committing to resource and partner with. Why? Because desperate is good sometimes. And I can't think of many people I would rather get a little desperate with than the good news preaching, cancer surviving our friend Freedom Blackwell, right? This is going to be, sure. This is going to be, people say, is this going to be hard? Is this going to be messy, right? Is this going to cost us something, Northway? Is there a chance that it might even fail? Yes, and absolutely. But there's an Autumn or a Tatum in Homewood right now that desperately needs to know the power of the Most High God. So why wait here until we die? Let's go on a little epic journey together. All right? Okay? So there'll be more details about that coming in the fall, but let's get back to our 4 lepers in a famine. In verse 5, it says this: So they arose at twilight. Remember that, twilight. To go to the camp of the Syrians. But when they came to the edge of the camp of the Syrians, behold, there was no one there. For the Lord had made the army of the Syrians hear the sound of chariots and of horses, the sound of a great army. So they said to one another, behold, the king of Israel has hired against us the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Egypt to come against us. So they fled away in the twilight. There it is again. And abandoned their tents and their horses, their donkeys, leaving the camp as it was, and they fled for their lives. This story, what I love about it, not only tells us what's inside the heads of the lepers, it also tells us what's inside the heads of the Syrian army, right? The Syrian army believed somehow that the Israelites must have hired the army of some neighboring nations to come and fight their battle for them on their behalf. And they mysteriously hear, this army approaching, and they basically say, run, right? That they didn't even take the time to grab their horses, it says. I mean, you got to be like really afraid to run for your life and leave your horses, right? Leave the horses. They might slow us down. Just run, right? They just took off out of this camp. Please don't miss this, though. At the moment those 4 lepers, twilight, were desperate enough to go to the Syrian camp, at that moment, the people at the Syrian camp believed they heard the sounds of a massive army coming upon them. Folks, there may be a battle in your life that God has already fought for you. And he is just waiting for you to be desperate enough to go get there, right? See, so many of us, I think, we're stuck because we don't realize that God maybe has already won the battle. And all he needs you to do is be desperate enough to step into his victory. So many times I hear people screaming, God, do something and I'll follow you. And God is shouting back to you, follow me, because I've already done something, right? So what happens? Verse 8. Check this out. When the lepers came to the edge of the camp, they went into a tent and they ate and drank. Of course they did. They're starving. And they carried off silver and gold and clothing and went and hid them out in the wilderness. And when they came back, they entered another tent. And they carried things off from it and went out and hid them. Then they said to one another, we are not doing right. This day is a day of good news. If we are silent and wait until the morning light, punishment will overtake us. Now therefore, come, let us go and tell the king's household. So what do these starving lepers do? They eat and they drink and they start hauling off all that they had found into the wilderness. They go and hide it and hoard it. I mean, of course they did, right? So would I. So would you. And in the midst of it, they say, wait a second, this isn't good. If we continue to do this the rest of the night, and they use this word punished. And the word there for punishment is this Hebrew word, avon. And it means sin that leads to guilt. But it is also deeply connected to the divine. Okay, track with me on this. Avon, sin and guilt, that is deeply connected to divine punishment. See, they're not afraid of the punishment from the Syrians if they would happen to come back. They're not worried about the Israelites if they find them stuffing their face and carrying this booty off into the wilderness. I just worked the word booty into a sermon, huh? No, what stopped them in their tracks was their concern over divine punishment. If we don't go and share this with our brothers and sisters that are starving to death within the walls of Samaria, God will punish us. See, these guys, they could have stayed up all night, just eating. They could have taken dozens and dozens of trips and hid enough stuff to keep them in good places, for a long, long time. Instead, they made a decision to be generous because they knew that's what God wanted them to do, and that's what God required of them. See, the opposite of generous is stingy, it's selfish, it's being greedy. So let me ask you a question. If God has gone before you and allowed you to step into battles that he has already won for you, are you being generous in those victories? Northway, I hope that you trust me as your leader. If I've proven one thing to you over the last sort of 4 years or so, I hope it's this, that I will steward your generosity and your giving with great discipline. I will not run ahead of you, and we will not spend money that we don't have. The resource, by the way, that we're providing for this House of Manna partnership is in our budget. We didn't ask for a special ask or take it or borrow it from our capital reserve. We will launch a 6th campus when we're ready, when we have the money in the bank to pay for it. We're not going to take a loan or run a capital campaign. And if you're new to Northway, this is something that I don't say very often from up here, but I really felt like I wanted to say it today. Some of us, we're simply hoarding the provisions from the victories that God has won for us. We believe in Jesus, and therefore we trust him with our eternity. Yet sometimes we don't trust him with our stuff. And we're stingy, and we're selfish, and we're greedy. Folks, I if you don't know the structure, I report to an elder council here, and they are privy to all of my, tithing and giving records. And I'm not concerned about scrutiny from them. However, I am concerned about avon, about divine scrutiny with how I am handling and being generous with the victories that God has already won for me. See, when you begin to live your life in a way that God designed you to live, and you be generous with all that he has given to you, he will begin to maximize all your gifts and talents, all of your opportunities and possibilities, and there will be this unexplainable redemption and lift in your life. And if you don't, he won't. Northway, what if we were just a little bit more desperate as a church? What if we were really a little bit more generous as a church with the victories that God has already won in our lives? 1%, 23,000. Man, see, I believe we could do something in this church that people will be talking about 100 years from now. So what happens next to our 4 lepers in a famine? It says this. Verse 10, so they came and they called to the gatekeepers of the city. So they're yelling up to the gatekeepers because they're not allowed in. We came to the camp of the Syrians, and behold, there was no one to be seen or heard there. Nothing but horses tied and the donkeys tied and the tents just as they were. Well, except for these 2 tents that we sort of pillaged, but we'll make sure we put that back, right? Then the gatekeepers, they called out, And it was told within the king's household, 4 lepers, they get word to the king, right? That the battle's already been won. And the king that goes on to say he's unsure about this, so he gets a couple riders to go and investigate it. They follow the path or the trail of the Syrians all the way towards the Jordan. It says, so they went after them as far as the Jordan, and behold, all the way was littered with the garments and the equipment that the Syrians had thrown away in their haste. And the messengers returned and told the king. Then the people went out, and they plundered the camp of the Syrians. See, those of us that call Northway home, my prayer is this, that once we accept God's victory in our lives and fully trust Him with our lives, that we would never tragically create our own little camp and keep it to ourselves. When we know full well there's a world out there that's starving and desperate for God. Northway, we must be desperate. We must be generous, and we must be multiplied. Hear me on this. We are all just lepers living in a famine, searching for hope. And hear me on this. Everyone that's not yet in the kingdom of God, you know what they are? They are all just lepers living in a famine, searching for hope. But eventually, when you enter a place where God meets your needs in an area, when you enter a place where God gives you the hope and the love that you've been looking for, we have to realize that victory cannot only just be for me or for us. We have to be multiplied. The church is not for a group of lepers that somehow has cleaned themselves up. And as long as you folks out there, you clean yourself up, then you can come in and join our camp. See, we're all still lepers. We're just lepers that God has shown grace to, and we need to go invite other lepers into the camp. Something struck me about this text as I was studying it over the last couple days. These lepers, they were not healed. Anybody pick up on that in the story, They were not made clean at the end of the story. They still had this difficult condition to contend with. Just last week, some people made me aware that Autumn, from the second testimony there, was struggling again with some of her past battles. And they wondered even if maybe we shouldn't use her testimony. And I thought about it, and first and foremost, what I decided was that if Autumn didn't want us to use the testimony, then we wouldn't. However, I really hope she would. Because, see, not all testimonies or walks with God are tidy and neat with a little snap of the fingers. In fact, I think that there are some people here today that are really trying, yet they're struggling. It's like 1 step forward and 2 steps back. And you wish your testimony was, I had this destructive habit and now it's gone. But the reality is you still have leprosy. And Autumn told me, if you think my story can help someone, then I trust you to use it. See, and I believe there is someone here today that is still struggling with something. And they're here today and they're doubting whether or not they're good enough for God or good enough for this camp. And the answer is yes. The answer is yes. I am positive that Northway Dormont, being the wonderful church it is, they're going to surround Autumn with reckless abandon. If you've been given hope, you have to bring hope to the world. If you've been given joy or freedom, go take joy and freedom to the world. If you are convinced that Jesus is the hope of the world, then He is not an agenda. He is what the world desperately needs. What if the lepers in this story would not have gone back to Samaria? And what if one day those people within the walls of Samaria, starving to death, would have found out what the lepers found and decided not to share it with them? Northway, never let that be said of us. Let's be desperate. Let's be generous, and let's be multiplied in this city. I want to invite the ushers at all of our campuses to go ahead and get up and and prepare for communion. At all of our campuses right now, there's going to be some people moving around, so just stay up here with me, okay, if you can. At Northway Communion, we say what we have is an open table, which means it doesn't matter what denominational background you may have grown up in. As long as you believe in Jesus Christ, then this communion is open to you to receive. In a moment when they pass it out, just hold on to it, and your campus leader will be up to lead you through. But here's two things I want you to think about in a moment as you hold those elements that represent, by the way, Christ's body and his blood shed and given for us. One is, as you're holding those, I believe that maybe there's some followers of God right now that need to have an honest reflection on whether or not you're being generous with what God has provided. And the second thing that I think there's some people that may be here today, you need to give your life to Jesus. You've been thinking about it. You've been pushing it off. You've been saying things like, one day, God, I'm going to stop, negotiating with you. I'm going to stop maybe playing the games, and I'm going to take the risk and be all in. Can I encourage you, don't let another day pass. There's a line in that song that we sang at all campuses, Multiply. It says, your love will surely come find us, like blazing wildfires, singing your name. As you hold these elements, there's someone here today that needs to pause and say, today, God, I hear that music, and I want to go on an epic journey with you. So ushers, why don't you come forward at all of our campuses and pass out communion.